Let me know, I didn't properly introduce Frank, and I'm just going to say simply, he's one of the 2 or 3 leading sociologists in England. He's visiting, being of Hungarian extraction, he's visiting Hungary at the moment as a fellow of the Museum of Terror. And I would say in particular, given the character of the discussion, he is the founder and one of the leading figures of the website spiked.com, which I would say is one of the strongest, maybe the strongest proponent of Enlightenment values in both his own profession and more broadly in British society. Frank.
Yeah, thanks very much. I get a hint of pessimism in the discussion. There's a big problem. I don't know about you, but I've never been so excited and exhilarated by the world around me as is the case at the moment. And I think that there's a real buzz in the air amongst young people, amongst older people throughout Europe, and you can really see that the old order, which had so many problems to it, which was underwritten by a powerful cultural elite, is gradually unraveling. And that political parties that have been around since 1945 are all of a sudden, you will find...
We've got to change the mic.
No, this is good.
Oh, okay, sorry. And you'll find that gradually political parties that have been the mainstream, the parties of order, are disappearing. The Labour Party in England where I live, the party, the Socialist Party in France. You find everywhere you look that you can no longer take anything for granted. I'm very pleased with Brexit, I have to say. I was one of the few, well, probably the only sociologist in Britain that actively campaigned on its behalf. And I want to share you a story that happened to me the morning after breakfast. I live in a small town called Faversham in Kent. It's what they call a hick town, really small, not very, sort of worldly. And I went into my butcher, to get a couple of steaks to celebrate with my wife, and get a bottle of wine out to have a nice celebration. And I go into the butcher, and the butcher looks at me with the 2 assistants, and they're all smiling. And they say, "Oh, Professor Füredi, how did you vote in the end?" And I said, "Of course, I voted for Brexit." And all of a sudden, they start laughing and smiling and everything else. And I said, "Why are you reacting like this?" Well, he says, "We never expected that people like you would actually vote like people like us." In other words, what he was saying is we never expect somebody with a doctorate, a PhD, a professor, to vote for Brexit. Only people like us who are ordinary butchers, ordinary people living in the town. So we had a big smile. We laughed about it. I go off to work to the university. An hour later, I'm in the university, and the university looks like a clinic. I mean, it really resembles a psychiatric ward of a clinic. Everybody's going around. They're all depressed. I'm feeling embarrassed and I'm smiling, but everybody else is, it's almost like they're, overdosing on grief. This is like the worst possible experience. So I kind of talked to them, and when they realize I voted for Brexit, it's all of a sudden, they look at me like a pervert. This person is a pariah. How could you do that to us? Next day, I write about my experience. I write an article for the Times Higher Educational, which is the weekly magazine for academics. And I kind of recount my tale about what's really happening. And the reaction was very interesting because I get hundreds of hate mail from other academics, but I also get about 35 emails written by subversive academics who were for Brexit, who are too shy or too scared to actually acknowledge in England that they too voted for Brexit. They said that would be the end of my career. I could never do something like that. And I think that differential response in that one day really sums up everything you need to know about Brexit. The way in which we have 2 different worlds with 2 different outlooks, and the way that that kind of different world is so segmented, it lives in such 2 different bubbles that there's absolutely no communication. People who are for Remain simply do not talk to people like us. And next day, when they discovered that us had won, they said, well, the common thing that they all said to me, Frank, I've never met anybody that was for breakfast. And all I could say was, get a life. Just go out on the street and see what the rest of the world is really like. And I think that separation, I think, is really fundamental. And I experience it everywhere. I experience it in Hungary, when I talk to Hungarians between my academic friends, who hate football and are surprised that I love football. They think that I'm a pervert, for that kind of reason. I experienced it in France. Everywhere I travel, it's there. It's all driven by different dynamics, but there's a fundamental disconnect between the people, the demos, as they used to be called, and everybody else. Now, the most interesting thing that has occurred, and it should be of concern to anybody, is the hatred for democracy that has been published in the press. I mean, the number of articles that you now read that denounce democracy and say it's a really bad idea. We thought it was a really good idea, but these people are too emotional, they're too irrational, they don't have all the information, they're badly educated, they're so prejudiced, they are racist, they are xenophobic. You get to the point now where the word populist has become a synonym for Eurosceptic, which has become a synonym for being a xenophobe. I mean, the conceptual leap from being Eurosceptical to being a member of the Nazi Party is almost effortless, the way that this has occurred in a very, very short period of time. So you got this classical hatred for the masses, and I go back to my Greeks, because I actually don't think very much has changed. All the technology stuff and everything else was there all along. If you remember, in Greece, anti-democratic theory developed before democratic theory. The oligarchy in Sparta and Athens really didn't like the demos having so much of a say in terms of what was going on. And Plato and the other philosophers actually wrote critiques of democracy before it was institutionalized. And Socrates should really be on primetime television today, because what did Socrates say? He basically said, look guys, when it comes to a ship, we appoint an expert. We have an expert captain who runs a ship. When we build a house, we don't get any Tom, Dick, and Harry to build a house. We get an expert architect to build a house. But for some reason, when it comes to politics, every citizen of Athens has got the same voice. These are not experts. They have no moral authority. They are just uneducated, different kinds of people. And when you read Socrates, what you will find, coming out of his mouth, are all the arguments that the anti-populists use today against the people. And not just that. Technology kicks in Greece. Fake news kicks in Greece. I mean, if any of you study the sophists and the way they lie through their teeth, right, it makes fake news look positively objective today. I mean, positively objective. But what did Socrates say about writing? Because that was a new technology. Writing and the publishing of written scripts was the new technology. And Socrates wouldn't have any of it. He was very suspicious. He said, the real problem with writing is you don't know whose hand it gets into. Right? You don't know whose hand, and you don't know whether these people whose hand it gets into will have the philosophical insights and the philosophical gifts to understand what they are reading. And wouldn't it be better if communication was restricted to me, Socrates, having a very philosophical discussion with the people? That would be a much more objective way of dealing with things. And already at that time, all the fear of technology, which then becomes a moral panic by the time you have the printing press, and which today we recycle through the prism of the internet, all these discussions about lying and everything else were there. In 17th century France, small pamphlets that were published against the king were the fake news. They were all exposing things that the ruling class didn't want to be exposed. So nothing is new. I think what is new, and what is so tremendously exciting, is that something very important is happening in the domain of culture. I want to end on this. You see, the way that I look at it is that the big debates that we have never had have always been about culture. The right and left don't really matter very much. I come to Hungary, and I haven't met a single left-wing person, anybody I would call a serious left-wing person. I kind of look for them, and they really sound like somebody that was manufactured in Brussels. Given a Hungarian dictionary, and say, go back to Budapest and speak our language. That's what they sound like. They're about as left-wing, sort of as Juncker. I mean, I don't know what Juncker's policy. I thought he used to be a Christian Democrat, but anyway, that's really what they are like. So, all those things have really changed, but the cultural differences are crucial. The basic issue about values are really crucial. I mean, Charles began with a joke about the toilets, but it's not a joke. It's not a joke. My wife runs the largest abortion provider in the whole of Hungary. England, sorry. Getting completely schizoid. called the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. She gets a letter from the government and says, we're very disappointed with your services. That she's really worried. What are you disappointed by? The fact that you refer to women in the provision of your services. So my poor wife is then forced to reply by saying, sir, in 25 years of providing these services, I've never met a pregnant man, right? I've never come across anybody, sort of who had the condition that we usually call a woman's condition. And as long as I'm running this service, they will refer to women rather than the 85 different kind of things. Now, the coercive element there I think is really serious. I think we underestimate the powerful cultural pressure. Go to any university in America or in Britain, open your mouth, talk freely about what you believe in, and you'll realize immediately that the cultural dynamic, the cultural pressures are still there. So although we want Brexit, and although we have some very famous victories ahead of us, the struggle for cultural ascendancy is still a battle that we're not winning at the moment. At the moment, the media, academia, the intellectual sort of classes that exist are simply putting forward one single message. And what you have as against that is really a very small number of intellectuals who are prepared to stand up and be counted. And I think, for me, the importance of discussions like this is particularly to get our ideas together and really reaffirm the Enlightenment values of the 18th century, the old-fashioned liberal values of tolerance and freedom and liberty, and really politicize it so that the younger generations who are being miseducated into all this cultural, for lack of a better expression, cultural crap, can actually see the importance of reaffirming the values of our civilization.
I'd like to thank you all very much.